Hi guys, today is going to be a little bit more educational video about cutting agates, and the title is How to Get Better Results with Cutting Agates. And there's a certain amount of things that you can do to easily increase your cutting results. Some of them might be just common sense, others might require a little bit of knowledge about the agates itself and also the origin on where the agates are coming from. And I have made a little list for my employees when she started working with cutting agates for me, just so she has a little bit guideline on how to cut them and which point also to prioritize over another. And most important of all is, of course, that the agates are sitting securely in the vise I have here. So they're like securely clamped into this device, so they cannot move around and not jump out and destroy the saw blade, because a saw blade costs around $150, and you don't want to destroy too many saw blades because then it's going to be costly. Sometimes if an agate is also difficult to put in the saw, it's also convenient to use some kind of wood supplies, just so they have a little bit more surface areas that they can grab onto, just to make it a little bit more stable. You might have seen it in one of my previous videos before that I used this kind of wood, just so they have a little bit better grip and more surface area to grip onto. The stone should actually be put in the vise with as much surface area as possible, with as much connection points to the wood as possible, just so it's clamped in there as securely as possible. And also I'm using the clamps. I mean, it's a special kind of saw, so your saw might be different, but on this saw I'm trying to put them that the pressure of the saw blade actually goes into the clamp and not rotated like this, so the force will push the stone out like this. This will also just be a little bit more security reasons, so this the agate cannot jump out of the clamps. But first of all, security, don't ruin your saw blade, don't take any risks for that. And now we're getting to the more individual educational part about how you can actually increase the results of the quality of the stone with a better cut. First of all, try to avoid all kinds of windows where you can see banded agate, like in this case. Don't cut through any windows like this, because otherwise you will not have a complete agate pattern, and that decreases the value of the stone by a ton. So always avoid cutting through windows, cut next to the windows so you don't cut through any of the broken parts. That is part one. One of the exceptions where it is okay to cut through windows is when they have some sort of water level banding. It's because it's not, there's a difference between water level banding and the fortification banding, because the water level banding is a single layered band that are stacked on top of each other, and then they're not going orbicular. So once you cut through water level banding, it will not look as interrupted as in the face as versus you would be cutting through a window where it has like orbicular banded agate. Then another thing you should avoid is cutting through fractures. So in this case you can see there's a line here on the outside which might indicate that it is a fracture. If you see a line like this, try to avoid it. I mean, there's always a chance that the fracture might only be in the rim area and not penetrate inside of the stone, but try to avoid the lines that are obviously on the outside of the agate, because they might be fractures, and fractures decrease the value of an agate by a lot, at least for the really higher end kind of pieces. Also try to keep like some kind of security space from a fracture away, and also cutting away from a window. Try to keep at least 2 or 3 millimeters space, just to give it a little bit of extra puffer, so if the saw blade is not perfectly aligned, that you still have like a little bit of puffer and you don't cut through the fracture or the window. If you avoided all the fractures and all the windows, you will try to go for the biggest volume of the stone. For example, in this piece it's somewhere in the back here, in this area, because I want to try to avoid this window right here. I could cut anywhere in this angle, either this way or tilted in this way, but as long as I try to hit the biggest volume which is hiding inside of the specimen, then I will also get the most banding out of it. There's another exception, which is also with the water level banding, because that water level banding does not include the volume of the stone. You have to keep this part with the fortification banding separate from the water level banding. So if there's a lot of water level banding, then you need to take it out of the equation in terms of the volume of the stone, which sometimes is just like an estimation, but you might have an idea. Try to imagine what the stone might look like from the inside and make a best guess in that case. There's a lot of different ways in which you can cut a stone, and in order to widen your horizon on how you can cut a stone, try to experiment with different angles on how you can cut a piece, and you will sometimes be surprised on how different results can be. For example, I have a seam type of agate from Morocco here right now that I had in my eye vision, so I'm taking that as an example. But you can cut a seam agate like this, like slice it like this and have like the different kind of patterns with this kind of seam going. But just for a fun experiment, you could also just cut it lengthwise to get like an entirely different angle on it. But yeah, so just experiment around, try to find different angles just to get a variety, and you will be surprised a lot of times, I can guarantee you that. But always try to remember the first things that I told you. Try to avoid obvious windows, cracks, and all these kind of things. Then there's a few special cases that I also want to mention, which is parallax, stalactites, and pseudomorphs. So stalactites and parallax I would treat the most in the same in most cases. So this one, you can see it has like these tiny round dots on the surface area, which might indicate that there's tiny stalactites going inside of this stone. So I would try to cut it into a 90-degree angle, so the same angle that the stalactites are pointing down, which is different than the flat area of the surface here. So I would tilt it a little bit to actually get the same cutting angle like the stalactites are going into the stone, because then you will have them exactly parallel to the cutting face. The same is also with parallax. You will get the most parallax out of a stone, or the most contrast in a parallax piece. Another example here from Botswana that you can see, if you cut it in mostly a 90-degree angle to the surface, to the areas where it's splitting the agate, then you will get the most visibility of the parallax as well. If you tilt it, the banding will be tilted as well, and you will not be able to see the parallax as strong. So if you have locations where there's a lot of parallax, try to cut them for the tightest banding, and also with a 90-degree angle to the nodule. So if you cut it in kind of a tilted angle, you will not get a strong parallax, and also if you cut it for the biggest face, the banding will be further apart from each other, so you will also not get that strong of a parallax effect in the piece. So that's about parallax and stalactites. Two things that I want to mention quickly, one of them being pseudomorphs. Some areas have pseudomorphs, and in that case I would always try to cut through the origin of the pseudomorph. So sometimes you can see that there's like a crystal spray from the outside of the stone, where you can see it's like the center of the crystal spray, and you will get the most beautiful pattern if you try to cut exactly through the crystallization point of the pseudomorph. And one last thing I want to mention is if a stone has two different kind of windows, like this one for example. Here you can see water level banding, here you can see it has quartz, then try to cut closer to the window that is showing better pattern, because not always the banding in an agate is evenly distributed. Sometimes it is kind of shifted to one area where there's more banding than the other. Generally I would say best cut is through the biggest volume of the stone, but if you have more information like two different windows, then you can shift the cut more towards the window that is showing the better banding, which I feel is also common sense. However, this agate I actually want to use to show you to cut in a different angle. So here you can see it has water level banding, and here you can see the lines in which the water level banding is layered. So instead of water level banding, I would usually always cut in a 90-degree angle to get the most contrast out of the water level banding, but in this case I will just cut it a little bit tilted to show you and experiment a little bit around to see how the water level banding will actually look if it's not like a 90-degree angle like in this kind of window that we see, but a little bit more in a shallower angle. So you will see how different it actually can look, and for a fun kind of experiment you can do that sometimes, but I feel like the more aesthetic results you will get for water level banding is if you cut them in a 90-degree angle. And that is actually all of what I got, so you can make your own better experience with cutting stones, and I'm sure you will receive better results than just randomly cutting a rock without spending too much thought about how to cut it. And I will cut these 4 pieces right now to show you on how I achieve the best results with them. Alright, you can see that I actually cut this piece pretty parallel to one of the water lines going in here, and like I said, it's just a very different looking stone, but I mean, if you compare how the water level looks like in a 90-degree angle to that, I mean, there's some super interesting structures that can come out like this sometimes, but in 99% I would probably prefer to have a nicely structured water level banding stacked on top of each other. But I think for a fun piece, you know, you can just have your fun and practice around a little bit. Alright, so I cut that piece exactly how I wanted, just away from the fracture and in a perfectly adjusted angle to the stalactites I could see. Sometimes you never know if there's actually going to be stalactites inside, but having these tiny dots on top of the surface is definitely an indicator. I also just missed this little window, so I hit all of the things that I wanted to hit or avoid in this case. And as you can see, perfect little specimen with these tiny cute little stalactites that have also just been perfectly hit. So I couldn't have cut this any better. This is the Botswana agate where I expected some parallax banding, so I cut it pretty much in a 90-degree angle to the flow of the nodule, and it turned out to have some parallax, but the parallax is not quite as strong as I thought, and also it has a fracture that I was not able to see from the outside, and even if I look at it from the side view now, I could not spot any sort of fracture. So sometimes you just, you know, can't help it, and sometimes you just don't see the fractures from the outside, so there's nothing really I could have done to make this piece a better cut. But I mean, it's still a decently nice piece. I wanted to let it be a surprise, but I couldn't get around taking a quick glimpse of what it looks like, so I decided in this case to go for the biggest volume cut, but still have the contrast with the water level banding. And look at that fantastic agate from Mozambique. Just the perfect combination of the water level banding with the pink fortification agate on top. Great translucency and visibility here in the water level banding. It is close to a perfect Mozambique agate, I would say. Really special agate, and I'm super happy with this one. That's a special cut. If you enjoy the content with agates we are producing, please consider leaving a like and a comment for this video on YouTube, and don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more of our future content.